And the wildlife. I cannot stress enough, the wildlife. Humans evolved in an environment where the food chain had opinions about them, where every advancement in their cognitive capability was matched against predators, parasites, environmental hazards, and each other. Their biological architecture, denser musculature than their size suggests, adrenal response systems of remarkable efficiency, pain tolerance that functions as a competitive advantage rather than a warning system, and a skeletal structure built to absorb punishment, is a product of 100,000 cycles of brutal natural selection on a world that never once offered them a free pass. They are, in the most fundamental biological sense, built to survive things that should not be survivable. None of this was apparent when you looked at Terra Miyaki. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical tie, always neat, never fussy. Brown eyes that held a permanent quality of quiet amusement, as though she was perpetually aware of a joke that everyone else in the room had not quite gotten to yet. A small scar along her left jawline that she never explained unprompted. She had a habit, one I noticed within my first week of observation, of going very still and very calm in precisely those moments when everyone around her were becoming agitated. She smiled when things got tense. Not the nervous smile of someone trying to diffuse a situation, but something quieter and more settled. The smile of someone who had already done the math and knew how this ended. She was, in the 6 months since her arrival, unfailingly polite, genuinely curious about every species she encountered, and startlingly easy to underestimate. As it turned out, that last quality was among her most dangerous. The incident occurred on a Tuesday, or the Velorum Academy equivalent of a Tuesday, which is a third day of the second academic rotation, during Professor Valnesh's combat theory seminar. Valnesh is a retired military strategist from the Corvian Empire, compact and precise in the way of someone who has spent decades making economy of motion philosophy. His seminar on advanced combat theory is one of the Academy's most rigorous courses and practical application days, where students pair up to demonstrate the principles being discussed, are considered both the most educational and the most dangerous sessions on the academic calendar. That particular day's lesson was pressure points and leverage mechanics, how a combatant of smaller mass can use physics, geometry, and anatomical knowledge to overcome a size disadvantage. It was, in retrospect, a lesson that the universe had apparently decided to teach through demonstration rather than lecture. Craeth made his announcement before the pairings were even established. "I will partner with a human," he said, his voice filling the training hall the way thunder fills a canyon, completely, with no room left over for anything else. He was looking at Terra with a particular expression of someone who has decided to be generous. Several students went quiet. Others exchanged glances. I adjusted my recording equipment, because something in the back of my observer's mind was insisting, with unusual urgency, that whatever was about to happen needed to be captured in full. Terra looked up from the data pad she had been reviewing. Her expression did not change. "You sure about that?" Her tone was pleasant, light, conversational, even, but there was something beneath it, something I could not immediately identify and would spend the next several days trying to articulate in my reports. The best I eventually managed was this. It was the tone of someone who already knew the answer to the question they were being asked and had chosen to ask it anyway, out of courtesy. Craeth laughed, that rock-slide laugh of his, and straightened to his full height with the unconscious theater of someone accustomed to the effect they have on a room. "I promise to be gentle, little one. Humans are fragile things. I would hate to send you to the medical ward before you have seen the rest of the semester." "How considerate." Terra set down her datapad and rose smoothly to her feet. "I appreciate the thoughtfulness." She walked to the center of the training mat with the easy, unhurried movement of someone taking a stroll and turned to face him. The size difference, seen side by side on the mat, was almost comical. Craeth's shoulder was level with the top of Terra's head. His smallest arm was visibly thicker than her entire torso. She stood at the center of the mat and looked up at him with that quiet, settled expression, and if she felt anything at all about the physical reality of what she was about to do, not a single molecule of her face betrayed it. Professor Valnesh cleared his throat with the tone of a man running rapid calculations. Perhaps a different pairing might be more appropriate, given the substantial physical disparity. "This is fine," Terra said pleasantly. She rolled her shoulders, a small, casual rotation, the kind of thing you do to work out a morning stiffness. "I could genuinely use a practice." Craeth grinned. His teeth were bone-white and numerous. Just try not to cry. Human. It makes the learning environment uncomfortable for others. This got the predictable response from his audience. Laughter from a cluster of Vorgath students near the back wall, appreciative sounds from a pair of Corvians who had a well-documented relationship with other people suffering, and a contribution from one Zenthari student who, I noted with professional disappointment, absolutely should have known better. Valnesh, resigned of proceedings, outlined the exercise. Standard training demonstration. Craeth would establish a hold. Terra would attempt a proper grapple escape using correct technique. Simple, clean, educational. Craeth reached out with two of his forearms, establishing what the Vorgath call a conquest grip. Both of Terra's wrists seized simultaneously, her body pulled forward and off balance in a single smooth motion. It is a dominance technique. Not combat exactly, but a statement. A way of saying I control the geometry of this encounter before it has even properly begun. His fingers wrapped completely around her wrists, and she looked, I recorded this and reviewed it many times afterward, genuinely small. The way a child's toy looks small when held by an adult hand. You see, Craeth announced to the assembled students with the satisfaction of a teacher making a point. Proper grip requires absolute control of the opponent's primary limbs. The human cannot possibly. He did not finish that sentence. What happened next was fast. I mean this in the technical sense. I reviewed the recording 17 times, frame by frame, using the Frontally Observer Core highest resolution capture settings, before I fully understood the mechanical sequence. In real time, to anyone watching without specialized equipment, it appeared to be a single fluid event, a blur of motion, and then Craeth was on the floor. The reality, dissected in slow motion, was this. Terra's hands rotated inward, both simultaneously. The rotation broke the thumb lines of Craeth's grip at their weakest structural point, a basic escape technique, as she would later explain, taught in essentially every combat system across the galaxy. Standard, unremarkable. What came after was not standard. She stepped forward, not back, not sideways, forward, into the space between his arms, inside his reach, where his size stopped being an advantage and started being a geometry problem. Her right foot hooked cleanly behind his front leg, planting with precision. Her left hand, now free, rose sharply, not a strike for damage, but something more surgical, a precise, controlled impact against the nerve cluster at the base of Craeth's primary arm. His grip did not break from pain. His grip broke from pure neurological reflex, the body doing what bodies do when a specific signal arrives, regardless of what the mind would prefer. His arm went loose for exactly 1.3 seconds. I checked the recording. Terra did not waste a single fraction of that window. She seized his arm. She turned her entire body, a complete rotation, co-engaging, weight redistributing, and the physics of the moment shifted in a way that Craeth's nervous system had absolutely not been briefed on. His own forward momentum, the momentum of a creature 3 times her mass leaning into what he had assumed was controlled engagement, became suddenly and catastrophically his enemy. The leverage Terra had established was not about strength. It was about angles, about the elegant and pitiless mathematics of mass, velocity, and pivot points, the kind of ruthless efficiency that only emerges from a species that spent 100,000 cycles learning to bring down things that should have been unkillable. Craeth's balance went. His eyes went wide. I saw it, even at the speed it happened, the sudden recognition in them that something had gone profoundly wrong. Then Terra swept his legs, torqued his arm across a vector that compromised his entire center of gravity, and rode his fall like a surfer reading a wave. When Craeth the Unbreakable hit the training mat, the impact reverberated through the floor. Students near the edges instinctively stepped back. The sound was not the sound of a person falling. It was the sound of a very large object meeting the ground at speed. But Terra was not finished. In the same motion, seamlessly, without hesitation, as though the fall and what came after were a single choreographed sequence she had run 10,000 times, she transitioned the arm lock into a shoulder pin. Her knee found the joint with the certainty of someone who had mapped this exact position in darkness and exhaustion and competition, who could have found it blind. Her weight distributed across exactly the 4 points of contact required to immobilize all 4 of his arms simultaneously. Craeth the Unbreakable, 3-cycle undefeated combat champion of the Velorum Academy arena, lay face down on the training mat. A human girl who came up to his shoulder had turned him into a fixed object using nothing but physics, timing, and 100,000 cycles of evolutionary heritage. The training hall was absolutely silent. Then Craeth moved, or tried to. He summoned the considerable resources of his Vorgath physiology, the dense muscle, the high-gravity conditioning, the pure, stubborn refusal to accept a reality that contradicted his understanding of himself, and attempted to simply muscle his way out of the hold. Terra applied pressure. Small, targeted, precise. Not cruelty, not punishment, just enough force, in exactly the right place, to communicate something that his nervous system understood even if his pride was still arguing. Craeth made a sound I had never heard from a Vorgath before. Something caught between a wheeze and something quieter, more involuntary. The sound of a body overriding its owner's preferences. "You want to tap out?" Terra asked. Her voice had not changed. It was still calm, still conversational, still carrying that quality of someone discussing something entirely ordinary. She might have been asking him if he wanted salt with his meal. I do not," Craeth started. Terra shifted her weight. A small adjustment. Millimeters, maybe. The pressure on his shoulder joint increased in a way that was not theatrical and did not need to be. "Tap out," she said again. Quieter this time. Almost gentle. Craeth's hand hit the mat 3 times. Sharp, definitive. Terra released him immediately, completely, all at once, stepping back and giving him the full space of the mat. She extended her hand, open, palm up. He stared at it. He stared at it for what felt like a very long time, his expression cycling through stages like a slow-moving storm. Confusion first, then something that might have been anger gathering at the edges, and then, gradually, visibly, in a way that I think caused him something real, something that settled into a place that might have been the beginning of respect. He took her hand. She helped him to his feet. He looked down at her from the full height of what he was, and something had shifted in the geometry between them that had nothing to do with physics. The training hall erupted. I will spare you the full chaos of the next 20 minutes, the shouting in 17 languages, the translator chips working at capacity, Professor Valnesh deploying the particular tone of a man who has managed classrooms in active conflict zones, and moved to the conversation that mattered. After some semblance of order returned and the session resumed with considerably more mutual wariness between the remaining partners, I watched Terra return to her place, retrieve her datapad, and resume reading with the focused calm of someone who had simply completed a task that needed completing. Nothing performed about it. Nothing theatrical. A Corvian student named Theix approached her with the expression of someone whose understanding of a universe had just been significantly revised. That was... He seemed to search for adequate language. That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to do that? Terra looked up, and I saw what I can only describe as genuine surprise cross her face, as though the question itself was unexpected. "Oh, that's just basic self-defense. Every human learns this. Well, most of us." She paused. "It is pretty standard, honestly." "Standard," Theix repeated. The word seemed to require additional processing. "Sure. I mean, I am not even particularly skilled at it, relative to Earth. You should see properly trained fighters, actual dedicated martial artists." She said this with a mild, slightly embarrassed tone of someone clarifying that they are not, despite appearances, an expert. They are genuinely terrifying. I felt my respiratory system perform an involuntary constriction. There were more of them, and they were better. By evening meal rotation, the story had spread through the academy with the velocity of a plasma fire in an oxygen-rich environment, which is to say, completely, unstoppably, and with considerable embellishment along the way. In one version, Terra had broken both of Craeth's arms. In another, she had moved with such speed that no one present had actually seen what happened, the accepted explanation in this version being some form of perceptual camouflage. A particularly creative Zenthri student was earnestly explaining to anyone who would listen that humans possess a latent psychic ability that could temporarily disable an opponent's motor functions, which was not accurate but demonstrated an admirable commitment to finding a framework that made sense of what they had witnessed. I settled into my usual observation post in the dining hall and watched what happened next. The 5 human exchange students occupied their usual table near the east wall. Terra Miyaki, Marcus Webb, James Park, Annika Okonkwo, and Lisa Torres, all recent graduates of various Earth educational institutions, all part of humanity's inaugural academic exchange delegation, all seemingly unaware of the social seismic event that had just rearranged the Academy's internal landscape. They ate and talked and occasionally laughed at things only they understood, the way any group of friends does when they share a home language and a cultural shorthand, a small island of familiar warmth in a sea of the unfamiliar. What was notable, and what I recorded carefully, was the space around them. Students who would ordinarily have settled at neighboring tables were choosing seats elsewhere, not out of hostility. The body language was wrong for that. It was something more like the instinctive caution of organisms recalibrating their assessment of their environment. The gentle, reflexive widening of birth that happens when something previously categorized as harmless reveals itself to be something else entirely. Then Craeth walked in. The ambient noise in the dining hall dropped by at least 40%. Every species is its own version of the collective hell breath, that moment of suspended communal attention that happens when something unpredictable enters a social space. Craeth moved to the meal dispensary with the careful deliberateness of someone who is very aware of being watched and has decided how to respond to it. He collected his rations, Vorgath standard, which are essentially dense protein compounds formed into shapes that could plausibly be mistaken for rocks, because Gorath Prime's culinary tradition is largely indifferent to aesthetics, and scanned the room. His gaze found the human table. I caught myself activating my tertiary recording array. Oh no, I thought, with a particular resignation of someone who has spent 17 cycles watching predictable things happen. He is going to do something that will require 3 reports and a supplementary incident form. But Craeth did not do the predictable thing. He crossed the dining hall, stopped in front of the human table, and looked at Terra with an expression that had shed all its previous architecture, the theater of dominance, the performance of confidence, and replaced it with something plainer and, I thought, considerably more expensive for him. "May I sit?" he asked. The dining hall was, if anything, quieter than the training hall had been. Terra looked up, and her expression held that quality again, the quick, genuine reading of something, and then resolved into easy warmth. "Yeah, of course. Pull up a seat." Craeth lowered himself carefully onto the bench across from her. The bench registered its structural opinions audibly. The other humans shifted without comment to give him room. "I wish to apologize," Craeth said. His voice was quieter than usual. "Deliberate. I underestimated you. I was arrogant and disrespectful, and I used my position to create a situation I thought would humiliate you. That was wrong." A beat of silence. "Apology accepted," Terra said simply. "No hard feelings." "Your technique was flawless," Craeth continued, as though he had rehearsed this and was determined to complete it. "I have trained my entire life in Vorgath combat discipline. I have not lost a match in 3 cycles. And you used my own strength against me. You made my size into my disadvantage." He paused. "I have never experienced that. Not once." Marcus leaned forward with a grin that suggested he was enjoying this more than was strictly polite. "Yeah, Terra is scary with judo. She competed at regional level back home." Terra gave Marcus a particular look of someone who wishes their friend would develop better conversational timing. "It was not that big a deal." "She took bronze at nationals," Lisa added, with the helpfulness of someone who does not read the room especially well. "Would have been silver," Marcus agreed, "but she was still recovering from the collarbone." The table went quiet in a different way. "You competed with a broken collarbone?" Craeth asked, slowly, the way someone asks a question when they are not entirely sure they want to hear the answer. "It was mostly healed," Terra said quickly. "I broke it 2 months before. By nationals, the structural integrity was there. I just had some restricted range of motion, and look, it was a judgment call, and I stand by it." "You had spent years training," James said, with the tone of someone who has heard this argument before and considers it settled. "You were not going to miss nationals for a hairline." "That is exactly right," Terra said. Several nearby students had drifted closer with the casual, entirely unconvincing body language of people who were definitely not eavesdropping. "Your parental units," I ventured, because the observer in me could not let this pass, had different reactions to this decision. Annika laughed, bright and immediate. "That is the understatement of the cycle. Her mother is a physician. She had a very thorough conversation with Terra about risk assessment and bone density. She paused. Her father, on the other hand, wanted to watch the match recordings immediately and give tactical notes. Her father was a Marine, James supplied. Terra corrected quietly. He retired after 20 years. Now he teaches history and coaches wrestling at a secondary school. The Corvian student who had been the most committed non-eavesdropper at the adjacent table gave up any pretense of subtlety. Your father, a warrior of 20 cycles service, retired from active combat and chose to teach children. And coach them, Marcus confirmed cheerfully. Wrestling and some basic grappling. Really popular program. Actually, lots of kids sign up. You train your children in combat systems as a recreational activity, said a Zen 3 student who had arrived at the table sometime in the last few minutes without anyone quite noticing, because Zen 3 are gifted at occupying spaces they were not formally invited into. Sure, Lisa said, pulling out her data pad with the energy of someone who has been waiting for exactly this conversational opening. It is great for discipline, physical fitness, confidence, plus practical skills, obviously. She paused. Want to see some video from Earth? I have saved some good ones. What followed was one of the more remarkable hours I have documented in my 17 cycles of observation. Lisa produced footage of Earth combat sports. First, a mixed martial arts competition. 2 humans in a contained arena engaged in deeply technical and extremely physical combat, moving with a combination of power and precision that seemed genuinely incompatible with the mild-mannered exchange students currently sitting across the dining table. The crowd in the recording numbered in the thousands. This is entertainment, Theex said. He looked genuinely uncertain whether he was horrified or fascinated, which I noted was the appropriate response. Very popular, Lisa confirmed. And honestly, this is on the milder end of what you find in Oath combat sport history. Have you heard of gladiatorial games? Or hockey? She showed more recordings. Humans performing acrobatic martial forms that appeared to be dancing right up until they became something else. Humans demonstrating ground techniques with a patient, methodical intensity of engineers solving a problem. A video, this one caused the most reaction, of a human female, small even by human standards, executing a throw on a male human roughly twice her body weight with an economy of effort that made it look obvious. She released him, straightened, and extended her hand to help him up, and they bowed to each other. That is possible, Craeth said. He was watching the recording with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not discomfort, exactly. Something more like revision. With proper technique and enough practice, Terra said. Size is a factor, but it is one factor. Leverage, timing, reading your opponent. Those can rebalance the equation significantly. We need to inform the combat instructors. Theex said suddenly, sitting up straighter. These principles, if they could be adapted, the biomechanical applications alone. Actually, Marcus said, glancing at Terra with a sideways smile of someone who has been holding something back. Terra had already been thinking about offering some informal training sessions. Basic principles, leverage mechanics, adaptation for different physiologies. If anyone is interested. The response was not what I would call measured. Nearly 20 students indicated interest simultaneously. The noise level rose. Someone knocked over a beverage container, and no one noticed. Professor Valnesh, who I had not registered as being in the dining hall but who was apparently occupying a table within clear earshot, set down his utensils and approached with the expression of a man making an administrative decision. Miss Miyaki, he said, with a careful formality of a military strategist who is trying to sound like an academic while every instinct he has acquired over a lifetime of professional violence is telling him to pay very close attention to what is in front of him. I think a more formal structure might serve everyone better. Proper academic framework, safety protocols, documented instruction. He paused. Would you be willing to conduct a formal seminar? For academic credit, naturally. Terra blinked. I mean, yes, of course, if you think it would be useful. Miss Miyaki, Valnesh said, with a gravity that was entirely genuine, I think it would be among the most valuable instructions Academy has offered in some time. The seminar began 2 days later. 50 students attended the first session. The number was not, in itself, remarkable for a new elective offering. What was remarkable was the composition. Students from 14 different species, 6 different academic disciplines, ranging from first-year exchange students to third-cycle veterans who had spent years in Val Nesh's own advanced combat programs and were here, now, sitting cross-legged on training mats while a human exchange student walked them through the physics of a hip throw. By the third session, the number had doubled. Terra taught with a patient, methodical thoroughness of someone who had grown up learning things by doing them 10,000 times rather than being told about them. She did not lecture in the traditional sense. She demonstrated, adjusted, demonstrated again. She adapted instinctively, showing Vorgath students how to use their multiple arms in complementary rather than competing ways, pointing out angles for Corvian students whose natural flexibility created leverage opportunities they had never considered, helping Zenthri students work through their cultural hesitation around physical contact by starting with techniques so mechanical and physics-based that they barely registered as touching at all. She was unfailingly patient. She made mistakes into teaching moments without condescension. And she laughed. This was what I noted most often in my records. She laughed during training. Freely, genuinely, in the easy way of someone doing something they love. The idea that a combat training session might be enjoyable was, I gathered from the expressions around the mat, a somewhat novel concept for many of the students present. My reports to the Frontalea Observer Council became increasingly urgent across those 3 weeks. The humans are not what we anticipated. I wrote, searching for language precise enough to carry the weight of what I was observing. They are not aggressive. They are not hostile. They do not present a behavior profile of a species that has weaponized its combat heritage. What they present instead is something more difficult to categorize, a species that has normalized extraordinary capability. They do not experience combat training as violence. They experience it as problem-solving, as craft. They teach it to children the way other species teach mathematics or music, as a foundation for understanding the world. The response from my superiors was 3 words: continue, do not interfere. Interference, of course, was already happening, just not from me. 3 weeks after the training hall incident, Craeth found me in the observation lounge at the end of the 3rd cycle rotation. This was, by any standard, unusual. The Vorgath and the Frontalea had no particular history of meaningful conversation. We were recorders. They were the things being recorded. And Craeth had, in my experience, never voluntarily sought the company of anyone who could not serve as a sparring partner. He sat across from me with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who has been thinking about what they want to say for long enough that it has become a formal occasion. Kix, he said, I need your perspective on something. I set my recording equipment to passive capture and gave him my full attention. I am listening. I have been training with Terra every day for 3 weeks. He paused, looking out at the distant scatter of stars beyond the observation lounge wide panels. And I have realized something that I do not entirely know what to do with. Tell me. Vorgath combat philosophy is absolute, he said slowly, as though he was examining each word before committing to it. Dominance. Strength, overwhelming force. The philosophy is not just tactical, it is moral. We believe that the strongest have an obligation to lead, to protect, to define the terms of every encounter. It is how we understand the world. He was quiet for a moment. But humans fight like water, he said. They do not oppose force. They become the force. They find the angle where your strength is actually your weakness, where your mass is actually your vulnerability. And it works. Kix. It works better than anything I have trained for 3 cycles to do, and I cannot explain that away. Does it trouble you? It humbles me. He said it without flinching, and I understood what it cost him. My entire culture has organized itself around the belief that we are the supreme warriors of this galaxy. We have built our history, our values, our identity around that belief. And a human female half my size, using techniques he considers basic, took that belief apart in about 4 seconds. He looked at me directly. What does that mean, do you think? I considered the question carefully, because it deserved care. I think, I said finally, that it means you are wise enough to recognize when reality is offering you an education. Most beings never get that chance. They spend their entire lives inside the story they were told about themselves. The fact that you are sitting here asking this question instead of finding someone to take your frustration out on is not weakness, Craeth. It is the rarest kind of strength. He was quiet for a long moment. Terra says something like that, he said. She says ego is the first thing you have to let go of if you actually want to get better. That the students who improve fastest are always the ones who come in empty rather than the ones who come in already convinced they know things. She is right. I know. Another long pause. They are strange. Kicks. The humans. They laugh while they train. When someone fails a technique, they help them figure out why and then try again. When someone succeeds, they celebrate it as a group thing, not an individual thing. He seemed to be working through a concept that did not map cleanly onto his existing frameworks. On Gorath Prime, that would be weakness. You do not help your competition. You do not share your techniques. Strength is a personal resource, not a common one. He shook his head slowly. But hey, watching what happens in Terra sessions, the techniques improve faster because they share them. The whole group gets better together. How does that make sense? It makes sense, I said, if your goal is not to be the strongest individual in the room, but to solve the problem in front of you. Craeth sat with that for a moment. Then he said something that I have returned to many times in the cycle since, something that I included in every report I filed about the Human Exchange Program, something that I think captures, better than anything else I recorded, what happened to the Velorum Academy in those months. I want to go to Earth someday, he said. See the place that created people like her. Understand the ground that shaped this. I felt something that my species generally categorizes under professional neutrality breach, and chose to set it aside. I think that would be profoundly worthwhile, I said. He nodded once, and stood, then, with a slightly uncertain manner of someone doing something outside their established behavioral vocabulary. Would you come with me? When I go, I would want a proper record of it. I activated my recording equipment. Craeth, I said, I would be honored. He smiled, a Vorgath smile, which is an experience that takes some getting used to, and left me alone with the stars and my thoughts. My data pad chimed 10 minutes later. Message from the Frontally Observer Council marked urgent priority. Observer kicks. Your reports on the Human Exchange Delegation have generated significant discussion at the Council level and have been forwarded in full to the Galactic Defense Committee. The implications of human combat capability integration require formal assessment. Continue observations. We are particularly interested in the developmental systems you had described, the cultural normalization of martial training across age groups, the collaborative rather than competitive learning models, the apparent relationship between the Death World origin environment and the adaptive problem-solving methodology. The Council's core question, which we ask you to keep at the center of your ongoing observations, is this: how does a species become this? I set down the datapad and looked across the lounge. In the training hall adjacent, visible through the clear alloy partition that separated the spaces, Terra's evening session was running. The attendance board outside listed 63 students. She was in the center of the mat with Craeth and a Zen 3 student named Velorum, walking them through a 3-body leverage problem. Some scenario she had apparently invented in the last 10 minutes because a student had asked a question she found interesting. She was animated, precise, her hands moving in the clear arcs of someone for whom physics is a native language. Craeth was paying attention with the focus intensity he used to bring to dominance, that same total engagement redirected. Velorum was taking notes on the datapad, which was probably a Velorum Academy first. And Terra was laughing, because someone had gotten something right. Here's what I know, having spent 17 cycles watching the galaxy's species navigate each other. The Galactic Council's greatest recurring error is the assumption that danger looks like danger, that the species worth fearing will announce themselves through size, through weaponry, through the visible architecture threat. The entire planetary classification system, death worlds and paradise worlds and everything in between, is built on the premise that a hostile environment produces hostile organisms and that you can read the risk from the surface. But the universe is more elegant and more unsettling than that. What a death world actually produces, what 100,000 cycles of surviving impossible odds actually creates, is not aggression. Aggression is a blunt tool. What it creates is adaptability, the capacity to look at any problem, any adversary, any impossible situation, and find the angle where your disadvantage becomes leverage. The ability to take everything that should break you and make it into the very thing that makes you unbreakable. The humans did not come to the Velorum Academy as conquerors. They came as students, genuinely curious, genuinely open, carrying their heritage the way all species carry theirs, without always knowing exactly what they were carrying or what it was worth. Terra Miyaki did not walk onto that training mat to prove anything. She walked onto it because a large creature was being unkind, and she had spent her entire life learning how to handle large creatures being unkind, and she saw no particular reason to pretend otherwise. The ripples from that 4-second sequence on a training mat are still moving. In the combat theory curriculum at Velorum Academy, which now includes a formal unit on leverage mechanics and adaptive technique rooted in oath martial systems. In the career of Craeth, who would go on to become the first Vorgath military instructor to formally incorporate human grappling principles into Vorgath combat training, a cultural shift that the Vorgath Warrior Council debated for 3 cycles before acknowledging, with characteristic grudging respect, that it worked. In the 6 other academies that, within 2 cycles, invited Earth Exchange students to run seminars. In the Galactic Defense Committee report that came out of those observations, the one that quietly reclassified humanity from exotic new member species, monitor for integration challenges to something for which the committee had to invent new language. And in a small, private note I added to the end of my final Velorum assignment report, addressed to no one in particular, which read, "The Council asked how a species becomes this. I spent 14 months trying to answer that question, and here's what I have. You take any species. You put them on a world that tries to kill them every day for 100,000 cycles. You give them brains good enough to learn from it. And then, this is the part the Council keeps missing, you give them hearts big enough to find it worth laughing about. That is what makes the humans dangerous. Not the 1,000 combat systems. Not the death world musculature or the high-impact skeletal architecture or the remarkable pain tolerance. Not even the adaptive genius that lets them turn any disadvantage into leverage. It is that they went through all of it, every extinction-level predator, every ice age, every catastrophe, their difficult, beautiful, brutal home world threw them across all those cycles, and came out the other side curious, warm, genuinely delighted to meet you. The galaxy has never encountered anything like them. I am Kix, 3rd-level observer of the Fronally Collective, and it has been my honor to watch the story begin. The story of humanity in the galactic community was just getting started. End of Cultural Observation Log 7 Kix Velorum Cycle 17. File with the Fronally Observer Council and the Galactic Educational Exchange Program. Flagged. Priority Review. Galactic Defense Committee. Personal note appended. I have submitted a formal request for reassignment to the Earth Observation Station. Request approved. I have seen a great many things in my 17 cycles as a cultural observer for the Galactic Educational Exchange Program. I have watched species from across 4 spiral arms stumble, argue, and occasionally set things on fire while trying to navigate the beautiful chaos we call higher learning. I have documented political crises sparked by misunderstood dining rituals, romantic entanglement between species whose biologies were fundamentally incompatible, and one particularly memorable incident involving a Zen3 student and a malfunctioning gravity generator that I still have nightmares about. But nothing, not a single entry in my 17 cycles of meticulous records, prepared me for the day Craeth the Unbreakable decided to put his hands on Terra Miyaki. Let me set the scene properly, because this story demands context. Strip away the context, and you have a simple tale of a training exercise gone sideways. Keep it, and you have something far more significant, the moment the galaxy quietly, irrevocably changed. The Velorum Academy sits on the outer cusp of the Andromeda Spiral, perched at the edge of known civilized space like a lighthouse built for minds rather than ships. It is, by any reasonable measure, the most prestigious institution of higher learning in 4 systems. The brightest young minds from 73 member worlds come here to study advanced combat theory, xenobiology, interstellar diplomacy, and a dozen other disciplines that shape the future of galactic civilization. The architecture alone is breathtaking. Sweeping towers of silver alloy and luminous crystal that catch the light of 3 distant suns adorned and scattered into colors that have no names in most languages. It is also, to be completely transparent, a pressure cooker. Takes several hundred adolescents from radically different species, cultural philosophies, and biological makeups. Pack them into a single institution. Give them competitive academic programs, shared living quarters, and the particular cocktail of ambition and insecurity that defines youth across all known sapient life. What you get, reliably and without exception, is a social ecosystem of staggering complexity and occasional violence. I am Kix, third-level observer of the Thronely Collective, and I have been stationed here for the past 3 cycles documenting all of it. My species prides ourselves on our neutrality. We observe, we record, we analyze, we produce extraordinarily detailed reports that we then file with the Observer Council, who read them with great interest and do absolutely nothing. We do not intervene. We do not influence. We remain the invisible eyes of history, watching the great drama of galactic civilization unfold without ever stepping onto the stage ourselves. Most of the time. Now, Craeth. Let me be precise about Craeth, because understanding him is essential to understanding everything that came after. Even by Vorgath standards, he was extraordinary. The Vorgath are a warrior race from Gorath Prime, a high-gravity death world in the outer systems where the atmospheric pressure would crush most species flat. The predators have evolved over millions of cycles to be genuinely, artistically lethal, and the cultural philosophy can be summarized as follows. Strength is virtue, dominance is proof of worth, and if you disagree, we will settle this physically. They average roughly 8 feet in height, possess 4 arms of considerable power, carry bone ridges along their shoulders and spine capable of deflecting small arms fire, and enter the galaxy with a default assumption that they are the most dangerous thing in any given room. Usually, they are correct. Craeth had arrived at Velorum Academy 3 cycles prior, and had proceeded to establish himself as the apex predator of its social ecosystem with the casual efficiency of a species that had never really needed to try very hard. He was the Academy's undefeated combat champion, 3 consecutive cycles in the arena without a single loss. He moved through the corridors with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once considered that the universe might push back. His laugh sounded like an avalanche finding its way downhill. His presence in a room changed the room. He was not cruel, exactly. Craeth did not go out of his way to cause harm. But he had never had to develop the particular empathy that comes from vulnerability, because vulnerability was something that had simply never applied to him. Then there was Terra Miyaki, human female, 5 feet and 4 inches tall by Earth measurement, which translates, I checked the conversion tables 3 times because I assumed I had made an error, to approximately 1.63 meters. In a galaxy where the average humanoid sapien stands closer to 2 meters, and where species like the Vorgath routinely exceed 2.5, Terra was, by every objective metric, small. She had arrived at Velorum Academy 6 months prior as part of humanity's inaugural exchange delegation, and I will be honest, most of us thought it was a gesture, a diplomatic nicety, a way for the newly inducted humans to feel included while the adults figured out what to actually do with them. See, Earth had only recently joined the galactic community. Their star system sits in a relatively isolated spiral arm, separated from the nearest inhabited systems by a stretch of unoccupied space ahead. For most of galactic history, men they developed in complete ignorance of their neighbors. When first contact protocols were finally established and the standard planetary assessment teams arrived, the initial reports generated considerable discussion at the council level. Death World, Category 9. For those unfamiliar with the classification system, Category 1 describes a gentle paradise world where evolution was kind, resources are abundant, and life developed in an environment so forgiving that the dominant species never really had to fight for anything. Category 10 describes a world so actively hostile to life that the mere existence of sapient organisms that constitutes a statistical impossibility, a planet that is, in the truest sense, trying to kill everything on it every moment of every day. Earth. Category 9. Crushing gravity relative to galactic average. Extreme temperature variation across its surface, ranging from life-ending cold to life-ending heat within the same atmospheric system. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere that register as mildly toxic to most known species. Tectonic instability producing regular catastrophic geological events. Magnetic field fluctuations that would interfere with standard navigation systems. Weather patterns that include, and I want to be precise here, frozen water falling from the sky at terminal velocity. An electromagnetic activity level that produces continent-scale electrical storms.